Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidt List. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt. Very excited you're here because we are going to be talking about, well, podcasting. We're going to be talking about podcasting with my friend Matt. All right, I want to jump into podcasting specifically for businesses. Why should a business start a podcast? Why is it important? What's the benefit of it? We're going to talk about all those things with Matt. So, Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Hey, that was a dynamite intro, man.
Thanks.
Like
That's
all the
I've
energy
only
just
done
like in, yeah.
I've only done 260 of them, so I'm getting better slowly. Tell me about the work you do and who do you mostly work with?
Yeah, sure. So MK Quinn Media is my company, and we're a content strategy and creation firm that kind of helps people tell better stories everywhere and create better content all over the place. One of the ways that we do that is through podcasting, and it's one of those things that we sort of fell into along the way, but we're happy to help others find this kind of magic bullet.
Yeah, that's awesome because I want to ask you, how did you get into podcasting originally? As most people, like you mentioned, a lot of people trip and fall into it. What was the cliff that you were particularly standing on when you made that fall?
Well, I had a start and stop with podcasting. So, like in 2006, I started doing podcasting way back when nobody did
About
podcast,
100.
and it was like, oh, this is never going to last. Podcasting is not going to be a thing. We're going to get out of it, and we stopped doing it. And so, fast forward to everybody's game changer, COVID, and next thing you know, we're in podcasting land, and it's like, oh, we need to find ways to connect with other human beings in ways that really can make a difference for them and that they can relate to. And
Yeah.
so we start podcasting. And, for me, I spent a lot of time doing a podcast for the International Car Wash Association called Car Wash the Podcast. And it was all about just lifting people up and telling great stories and making people feel proud of the work they did.
Was it like Car Wash the movie at all?
It was not.
Was
I mean,
Oh,
it's maybe similar, like, I mean, it was my humor. So maybe a similar level of humor, but, positive stuff too.
okay. Shout out to Car Wash the movie. If you people have not seen that, I suggest you. Okay, maybe don't go and watch it. It's a really
Maybe not. I mean, yeah.
It's one of those really good bad movies, in my opinion. Yeah, sorry, we could go on forever about that. I know I could do an entire episode about car wash. I'm listening to this show and I own a business, I run a business, and I hear about this podcasting stuff. And I know a lot of businesses are doing podcasts. What are some of the questions I should be asking myself before I even buy my first microphone or get my first recording equipment? Where should I be starting when it comes to podcasting if I'm interested in it?
Well, I think you got to start with who are you doing it for, right? It's like age old marketing question. Know your audience first. Who's it going to be for before you go create the thing? Because honestly, a lot of people create podcasts for themselves. It can't be about you. You got to put your audience at the center of that story, or you're going to spend a lot of time and energy for no real results. First, know who it's for. And then I think it's got to be something that you're passionate about. So if you're a business owner, obviously you're passionate about your business, but what's that kind of so what factor, right? Like, what are you really interested in? What's your passion point? What's the thing that makes you stand out so that when you're talking about it, that you get jazzed about it and that comes through and people will connect with that. They'll start to trust you as kind of a leader in the space. And next thing you know, you're having all these conversations with folks that are much more authentic and much less about trying to sell than create relationships.
Yeah, what I found too is also adjacent topics. So if you know your ideal client profile and you've got a good handle on who those people might be, is there other commonalities that they might be interesting to your point that could differentiate you in that space? So let's say you're doing an HVAC company, right? Maybe the idea of logistics around running those types of businesses might be of interest versus just talking about air conditioning pipes, those types of things. So I found also that finding those adjacent topics that are also passionate to that same group can really set you apart from all the other folks that are out there producing the same content, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's all about how do you make it interesting and
Yeah.
valuable for those folks. And it's one thing to say, hey, we're the leaders in HVAC. Well, great. There's lots of people who do HVAC and do it very well. But if you can say, hey, we love this industry, we love what we do, we love the people that we're doing it for, and let's highlight those people and talk about them in ways that go deeper than the latest sheet metal fabrication techniques. We got to go deeper. So it's all about making this thing human, right? We listen to podcasts because we like the people who are doing the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a more intimate experience because a lot of
Mhm.
times you're listening with headphones so that people are right in your ear, or you're alone in a car, or you're multitasking. So it's a much more intimate experience. That connection has to be even more real versus
Yep.
a sort of lecture. And it's got to be more conversational, I guess.
Totally. No, that's totally it. I used to listen to No Stupid Questions all the time. Loved that podcast, tuned in every time it came out. Then they changed one of the hosts, and I listened to one episode and I have not listened to one since. I'm like, man, what a bummer because I really like that show, but something about the energy and the way the conversation flowed once they brought in the new host ruined the whole experience for me. So I think it's one of those things where if you're hosting a podcast and you're bringing people on, you've got to be comfortable in your own skin to start with, right? So you got to be able to talk to people and be willing to share some of that backstory of what's going on in your life, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to like tell us your kids' ages and your address, but you got to be like, you got to be a human and you got to be open.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. And I think that's where some people struggle because they think they've got to put on sort of this, I don't know, suit or
Right.
something of some
Right.
kind, power suit in front of their potential customers or audiences that shows that they're serious people. And
Mhm.
I find that that is one of the biggest problems I find, especially in the B2B
Yeah.
space, right? But if you get worried that if you step out of line a little bit or you overshare, you're giving a signal that you're not serious about things. And I don't know, maybe we learned this from our parents or school or something. And when we get caught up in this idea that everything has to be so serious, and I'm not saying it has to be crazy. It doesn't have to be crazy and wacky, but it also doesn't have to be stiff,
Mhm.
right? Because in this world, stiff equals like dead. Stiff, it gives off that vibe
Yeah.
of like it's just boring and dead. And so, I always talk about this with LinkedIn as a platform, for example, like your company pages. And people are like, not enough people are following our company pages. And I'm like, yeah, but nobody's there.
Right.
There's
Right.
just you just do posts. There's nobody to interact with. It's just a business. So it's stiff. And all the posts usually are very, very buttoned up and very, very, but I find that with LinkedIn and other places that, there's this serious nature that people sort of put on because they want to be taken seriously. So they have to act seriously. Is that something you find when you're helping people in sort of building up their initial podcast?
Yeah. It's a struggle to try to get people to relax a little bit, especially when you think about all the places that you can put content out. There are places for being very serious, right? Like if you're putting out a funding prospectus, you should probably have your stuff buttoned up pretty well. But when you're talking about people and having conversations and trying to tell stories, that's an art form. That's not a write down my 7 scripted questions and then read them one by one and make sure that we stay right on message all the time. So it's a little bit of an exercise in being comfortable letting your brand go a little bit. And that's
Yeah.
terrifying for some people. But as you let that out a little bit and you let your humanity show, great things can happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's what also sets you apart from the other folks out there, which is why they want to listen to your show, right? And you
Right.
do a little self audit. Why do you watch and listen to the things you watch and listen to? And you might find that there are those types of things that, that Matt's talking about here that attract you to those shows, the quirks and the different types of things that make that show unique, right?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things as we think about this for businesses, right? One of the other things that I think is super important as we start podcasting as a business group is you got to be comfortable with not a lot of downloads. Like this is not going to be a thing where you're going to put out 10 episodes and boom, you've got 100,000 downloads of those things. That's not how it works. So Matt, why do I want to do this then? Because you're feeding your content strategy. Like you're feeding the content monster that is just nipping at your heels all the time when you're thinking about, well, what are we going to put out? What are we going to talk about? What are we going to say? So it's really more about what can a podcast do for your business and how can it drive your content goals more than how can I become the next Joe Rogan?
Yep. Yeah, and I've found, and again, nothing against, big branding agencies and the work that they do. It's very, very important. But what I've found is that if you sit down some founders and people that run a business and just chat with them for a good amount of time, they're going to tell you what's unique and valuable about their organization that could then translate into bigger, broader, more pillar type content that you could be putting out there. And it might not be necessarily a podcast. It could be other things. But it's that passion, right? Like nobody can sell as good as a founder can sell.
Right.
I could sell all day long. It's like, well, but you just emote passion around this solution that you have for people. So
Yeah.
it's been amazing just watching the transformation that can happen when you sit people down and have a conversation about the value that they provide. And I think that's what people want to do with their podcasts. But I feel that they get caught up in the tech side of it sometimes too much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm maybe the worst person to ask this question because I have serious ear acquisition syndrome. I have the mic, I have a camera, I have the lights, but you don't need to be this produced, right? It's all about what are you trying to achieve at the end. Sure, you can get a nice mic and you can get a nice camera, but at the end of the day, it's what are you talking about? What's that story? What's the connection that you're making with your guest in a way that's going to help people want to come back and want to listen and trust you? So I think it can feel very intimidating. It's really not super challenging to get started. You can start really you could start recording with your phone if you wanted to or a Zoom call. I don't know how many podcasts started during the pandemic with just Zoom recordings. And then you can elevate that stuff as you kind of grow it, but one of the most important things is just start. We so many times that we have to have all the knowledge. If you think about learning a language, I don't know another language. I'm working on that life goals. But if you're learning a language, you're not going to do very well if you're like, look, I got to sit down. I got to take 8 years of Spanish. I have to have full command of that language before I go out and I try to use it. Everything in science says the people who learn languages best are those who go out and use it. So you gotta
Right.
use those skills and you gotta develop those
Yep.
skills because that's how you're learning quickly and on the fly. So same thing with podcasting, same thing with video, same thing with just about anything. The more you do that thing, the more you learn and the more you adapt and the more you figure out what's gonna work for you.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I tell people all the time, it took me about 20 episodes to figure out what my show was about. But again, like, from a business sense, you don't, that's a risk to do that. You're putting that out there. But to your earlier point, don't worry about downloads. I mean, just the authority of
Yes.
putting that out there, right? I've written a number of books. My goal is not to become rich off of selling books by any means. The goal is to get these things out of me that I've got this passion inside of me and I want to share this information with people. But from a monetary perspective, sure, there's some money made from the books, but it leads and opens up doors in other ways, which is what
Yes.
a podcast can do, right? Um,
Yeah.
is that something? I mean, like you mentioned, you were doing the car wash thing forever. Normally, people wouldn't think, a car wash association would have a show. Well, why would the? I mean, where did the concept come from? I just want to dive into that just a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, where
Yeah,
did
yeah.
the idea come from, and then what were some of the benefits you saw from doing that show for the association?
Yeah, so the concept had been kind of floating around for a while and it was around how can we tell more stories. And we started out doing like we would go to a place before we actually started the podcast. We would go out on a visit and we would do video capture and do all these things and spend all this resource to go physically be there. And everybody loved that content, but it was hard to do all of that and to keep that up and to keep that consistent. So as we thought about where could podcasting fit, that's a repeatable content channel for us. You don't necessarily even have to be on camera, right? Like you can do audio only podcasting and that opens up the doors for you in ways that weren't there when you had to think about how am I going to get a crew of 7 people to this location for 3 days. Instead, you could think about, oh, we can just do this show on a consistent basis, be very clear about who we're talking to, what we're talking about, and who we're talking about it for. And then we could really hone that in and make it really strong. And so ultimately over time, what that did for us was, I said it wasn't all about downloads and making money, but in this case, it did lead to revenue generation because we created that piece of content that our advertisers could buy into. And
Mhm.
so it
Yep.
used to be they had a print publication and they had a little bit of digital. Well, all of a sudden you have this other vehicle and you can give that as a benefit. So in their case, it was a high end, high value sponsorship opportunity for their best customers. And all of a sudden you've got extra revenue coming for something you were going to probably do anyway.
Yep.
And here we are.
Right. Well, that's the thing is that the idea of specifically for places that have partnerships, these podcasts can really amplify those partnerships in some really meaningful ways, right?
Yeah, it's super important because going back to what you were talking about earlier with, it's an intimate experience, right? So people trust who they hear in their ear and who they're watching. It's kind of human nature. You're going to listen. And so if you have partnerships or sponsors and you can bring them into that conversation in authentic ways, that's huge value for them because it's not a sales pitch. It's not an ad roll. It's just,
Right.
you talk about their product or what they do or why they're important or how they help you.
Yeah. No, and I've said this before, especially with things like the podcast or the books or YouTube channel or any of these types of things, is that I've gotten asked all the time, like, how much business has the podcast
Yeah.
brought your business? And I could say, like, I've never had somebody say, I listened to the show and now I want to buy something. That's
Yeah.
never happened. In
Right.
260 episodes, it's never happened. But what I have had is sitting in, the initial kickoff for a very large project and having one of the client stakeholders say, I listened to one of your shows once, or something, or they mentioned that they know of it or seen it. And what that says to me is that it's built some trust in some way with that
Hmm.
person to say, this is a person I can count on in some fashion that I can hire to do something for me or buy from them. This idea of not only building authority in the space, but building trust,
Yeah.
which is key, especially in a service based business, which I see over and over again. You need to build trust and authority in those spaces. Otherwise, you really get in the danger of looking just like everybody else. And I'm not saying podcasting is the magic wand to this, but if you have the wherewithal, it can really make a difference.
Well, it can be that piece of your content strategy that lets you figure out how to humanize everything else you do, right?
Mhm.
So it changes the way you talk about things. It forces you to be really clear and consistent by the nature of what a podcast is, right? You're sticking to a schedule. It has to come out on a certain date. You have to do the thing. So it just helps operationalize all of that content piece. And at the same time, when you go back to what we were talking about with humanizing the thing,
Yeah.
you being a human being and people listening to that, they start to feel like they know you, right? And they're forming a relationship with you, even if it's one-sided, even if you don't realize it. I don't know how many times people came up to me, if I'm at a trade show or something for the podcast that I was hosting, and they're like, "Oh, hey, I listen to all your podcasts." And they'll drop a line on me, and I'm like, "Oh, I didn't realize I said that much." But now I'm okay. So, it's just funny what they'll pull out. I mean, I've gotten phone calls from people who are like, "Hey, this is gonna feel a little weird, but I've listened to all of your episodes and I feel like we're friends." I'm like, "Yeah, that is a little weird, but we can be friends. Why not?"
Well, and I also find that that's, especially if you do a guesting type show, it's a great way to get more guests. Because sometimes the people that listen to the show have a lot to share as well. And that's one reason why they like to consume that content. And I find really good guests from people that listen to the show, to be honest. It works out great. But even if you're not doing a guesting show and you're doing more of a solo show,
Yeah.
let's touch on tools and equipment real
Yep.
quick, Matt, because I want to get your perspective because a lot of people ask me, which microphone should I get? Which service should I use? Because it's not as simple as just hitting a button and it's not as simple as sending a text message. There's a little bit more to it. So where do you start with people? Do you suggest they go to a podcast studio, like a professional place? Do you suggest they buy their own equipment? How do you coach people through initially getting started?
I always start with the end in mind, right? Like, what do you wanna be? What do you wanna be when you grow up? Like, do you wanna be like a highly produced, um, weekly show that like you want the high end cameras, you want all this stuff? Does that fit your brand? Or are you looking for something a little more authentic and a little more conversational in general? So I always start with kind of what do you want to be? And then you kind of go from there. It's like, and then we get into talk to me about your skill set, right? Are you techie? Are you not? And that because that changes very much the kind of equipment recommendations that I might make. I would say first out of the gate, don't go to a podcast studio. Nothing against podcast studios. I think they're awesome. But it's gonna be too much. For first time out of the gate, it's gonna be too much and it's gonna feel overwhelming. And that might make you not do it again. So I think one of the best things that people can do is learn from others, right? And so look at other industries. So who does this stuff really well? Streamers, right? So streamers have great gear. So there's a company called Elgato that I love their stuff. It's reasonably priced. It's easy to get into, and it all works really well together, which is awesome. And you can have you can get really fancy with it and do all kinds of stuff, but it works well together. It simply works, and it's a relatively low price point, so you don't have to get into all of the bells and whistles and the things to get a really nice looking and nice sounding, which is the most important part, podcast.
Yeah, I find that people really get hung up on on the tools
Ah,
very quickly. I mean, it's important to sound good. I mean, audio needs to be good, but just reach out to some other podcasters. Reach out to a guy like Matt. Ask him some questions. As podcasters, we have been through a lot of. I can tell you, in this tool chest back here is
yeah,
a
yeah.
bunch of microphones I don't use anymore because I've tried a ton of them. Uh, and so learn from our. I can't tell
Yeah.
you like how many podcasters would be more than happy to share their journey through the equipment and recording side of things because it can be arduous.
Yeah, it can be a lot, and microphones especially are a little bit of a personal preference thing,
A hundred
um,
percent. Yeah.
and how each microphone makes your voice sound. So, I would say don't be afraid of you know returning some,
Yeah.
because if you think you want to go down this path, get 3 or 4 different microphones, test them all, and send the ones back that you don't want to keep.
Yep.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah. Just grab a bunch, give them a go. And again, understand the and because the environment's going to be different no matter where you're at. So you're going to want a different type of microphone depending on the environment. But you don't have to go crazy. I mean, my first couple of microphones that still sound great are just these uh Technica, like,
Yeah.
they're like $60 microphone. They're great. They're great. They probably use them more for karaoke than anything. They're great. They work fine. Um, and the idea of people are always thinking about like, I got to build a studio. I got to do this. No, you don't really.
No.
You don't really need to do any of that. Nobody cares. You care.
Nope.
You might care.
Yeah.
But nobody else cares.
No, and really the all the generational data would tell you that everybody coming up wants more authentic,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep. Hundred
don't go
percent.
too crazy. Don't go too crazy.
Right. Well, speaking of authentic, let's talk about cadence real quick because I want to get your opinion, Matt, on cadence. If I'm doing a B2B type podcast, should this be a weekly thing? Should it be a seasonal thing? Should it be monthly? What have you seen work in the past? What should especially in the B2B sort of space, what sort of cadence should I be expected to run?
I think whatever you choose, you have to be able to commit to it. So, if you have content that you can put out on a weekly basis, great. That's awesome. Do it. Be a weekly and do it every week. And I will tell you that that is a stressful situation. Um, and we can talk about that in a minute. But I think the most important thing is whatever that schedule is, whatever you say, I'm going to come out every month. I'm going to come out every 2 weeks. I'm going to release a 6 episode series on a specific topic. Do it, stick to it because that's your word, right? And your word is your bond. And especially when you're talking about making those relationships and trying to build trust, people aren't going to trust you if it's like, oh, I release weekly and then maybe you got weekly for 4 weeks and then something happened and you fell off the trail a little bit and you missed an episode. And there's not, 5 people out there probably going, "Hey, wait a minute. I was supposed to have an episode of that show today. Where'd it go? What happened? Why am I not hearing from them?" And just like that, 4 weeks of trust that you built on is gone. So,
Yeah, and if you don't make it important, nobody else can make it
right,
important
why does
for
it
you.
matter? Why does it matter? Yeah.
Yeah.
What I
So
think can be really successful for people is, um, and I haven't seen a lot of people doing this, kind of episodic stuff that's like series based, right? So,
mhm,
um, take one topic that's really important to your business that you really can help people with, and do like a 4-part or 6-part deep dive in that,
mhm.
and bring in different perspectives. I mean, really, like, try to be like NPR, like, be like the radio, and bring in different people and voices, and put that thing together. That stuff can be powerful, like,
Yeah.
really powerful.
Well, and plus, with the power of transcriptions and AI and these things, you
Yeah,
can take all that content and reuse it in so many different powerful ways to meet your audience where they're at. So back to your
yeah,
point, early on with my show, it really helped me write my first book, to be honest,
mm,
because I had a lot of people on to talk about networking. And I did it specifically because I was trying to do more research on the subject for my book I was working on. And I took a lot of those transcripts and I read through them and I took chunks out of them and I rewrote pieces of them and they all contributed to my book, these different ideas from these people. And then I cited them in the book saying these people contributed and it was great. And I didn't feel um like it was all just me either, or, it was
yeah,
all just on me to like create this amazing piece of, you know, pillar content around these things. So to your point, I mean, I know some manufacturing companies that do shows and they'll bring in like some of the salespeople, some of the engineers, some of the
sure,
partners, some of the people that, work on the dock or so, whatever, like
yeah,
unload
yeah,
freight trains and different things. And they just show off interesting, unique things about their business, but then they take those things and they turn them into blog posts or they turn them into LinkedIn sort of stories, right? About impactful workers at their place, and it's just really fantastic how they take this one piece of content and then they can just spread it out there all over the place, and it's not a ton of work anymore. It used to be a ton
it
of
used to be.
work,
Yeah, it used to be
but
hard.
not these days.
No, because yeah, you used to have to send something out to get it transcribed. Now it does it in probably in your recording platform of choice. You used to have to, restructure the whole thing and find the quotes well, now AI can do a lot of that starting work for you so that then you're just kind of tweaking, right?
Yep.
So it's gotten a lot easier, and that's a big piece of why I think that podcasting can be a really uh, core component of an entire content strategy, because you're you put all the energy into that thing and it's going to produce so many outputs, right? So many outputs. I mean, to your point about the stories, right? Well, okay, I had a great conversation with someone on my podcast. Now I've got my transcript. Now I'm going to tell AI to craft me a 800-word blog post on the thing. Now I can pitch that out to local press. Here we go, right? Now we're getting earned media. Now we're playing in different spaces. That stuff goes on social. You've got the episode of the podcast people can listen to if they want more longer form. You've got real content, shorts content, all of this stuff because you sat down and had a 30-minute conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's not you're having these conversations already. You're already
Yes.
having these conversations internally. You're having these conversations with your customers and your business partners. All it does is take somebody to record
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
and then to have the idea for it. But, I mean, there is a commitment factor to your point, and that's the
Yeah.
one thing people have asked me, like, what does it take to make a successful podcast? And I have one answer, and that's consistency. That's it.
Totally. Totally. That's the biggest thing. I think something like 90% of podcasts never make it past 3 episodes
Yep.
because it's
Yep.
hard. Like, it's hard to stay on it, right? And
Yeah.
that's why you have to have an editorial calendar. It's amazing what that does because then you're mapped out, right? And it's like, oh, here's my content topics. I'm gonna be an every other week kind of a show. Cool. And the most important thing that I can tell anybody who's like doesn't want to go into the week to week space where they're worried about what's going to release on Wednesday when it's Tuesday at 10 p.m. Um, stay like 4 episodes ahead minimum. Like stay
Yep.
4 episodes ahead at all times. And there's some really easy ways to do that. You pick one day of the week and that's your recording day, and you do 2 or 3 recordings that day, and it will change your life if you're in this game.
100%. No, I mean, it's funny because the time we're recording this, I'm loading up for the summer. So
Yeah.
I'm doing 3 or 4 episodes this week and next week, and then a couple more. And then my June and July and most of August is covered for shows. So because 2 reasons. One, I like to have this summer to not do podcasting as much.
Be a human. Yeah.
But number two, and most importantly, is that getting people's time in the summer,
Mhm.
especially the types of people that I have on the show, which are more entrepreneurial. They're business owners. They're people that their time is stretched and they're never not busy. So um, getting their time during the summer is also challenging. And so, to your point, if you've got that editorial calendar and you can get ahead of the game, and you make it appointment based, I mean, people, it can go real smoothly if you just are planning out and having a little bit of a vision.
Yeah, I
Or
agree. I mean, I think it's the operational component, right? Like,
yeah,
great, I have an awesome idea for a show. How am I gonna make the show run every single week or every 2 weeks or every month? Oh
yep,
boy, there's process involved. So, yeah, I
a
mean, I
little
think
bit,
yeah, just a little bit. I think,
a little
we
bit.
were talking about what do I do? How do I get started? Well, first you gotta start it, but as you do that, you should be thinking about how can I scale it? So it's like it's not unlike your business. You're always thinking about your business. How do I scale? How do I grow? How do I scale? How do I grow? Podcasting is the same thing. So as you're going and you're building that plane as it's taking off down the runway, think about, oh, that's an operational gap. Oh, I'm going to be able to put process around that. Oh, this journey should be this way. Oh, I can automate that. So always be looking for those opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And what I've found too is that as doing the shows and putting it out there, you start to get connected with other podcasters, and
Mhm.
then you start to guest on their shows, and then you get your show out there more. It's a great organic sort of community too of support that I found over the years. It's something that it can to me, it's just become addicting. Like
Yeah.
I have to hit the publish button like all the time, like publish, 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 because of the value that it's brought me over the years. But it didn't in the first 20 some episodes. There was none of that, right? But
Yeah.
I had committed when I started it that I'm going to do this for at least a year, and then I'll look back and say, was that worth my time or not? Um, and it was great, But again, like if I was like, all right, well, I'll do a show, like, and then
Right.
see what
Right.
happens.
Right.
Yeah,
You
no,
would not be here today. You would not
I
be here
won't.
today.
No, 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 no,
Nope.
no, no.
Nope. That first one is like, that was it. Great.
Exactly. Now, and again, I started in my 40s, and I mean, as a 40-year-old, you usually get stuck with the 3 Gs, which is golf, grass, and grilling. The man. And um and I was finding myself that, I wanted to consume less and produce more. I wanted to
Yeah.
create more things than I was consuming, and podcasting was just a great avenue for me to do that. And some people are better writers. I'm
Yeah.
a talker, and so this just made sense.
Well, I've always loved how much you can learn, right? I mean, I joked with my wife a lot through the car wash podcast that I was producing and hosting that I should open a wash, right? I should open a wash. I know everything. I talk to all
You
the
do,
great people.
the inside and out of it.
Yeah. And she was nice enough to always remind me that, well, you could do that, but you also only talk to the people who are doing well. Like you don't know any of the bad stuff about, what it actually run that business. You just hear all
Right.
the great stories. I'm like, oh, that's maybe fair. Maybe a fair point.
Yeah,
So I still
that
do
would
not
be a
have a
very
car wash.
different podcast.
It would be,
car,
yeah, yeah.
car wash
So
failure stories.
Oh man.
by
Although, yeah, all of those successful watches have failure stories in them, right? Just like every
oh, of
business.
course, yeah, but nobody wants to talk about those, and we don't want to
No,
celebrate those.
no, the good
Man,
stuff.
I could talk to you all day. You're gonna have to come back on the show. We got a lot more podcasting advice to give. If I want to get in touch with you and learn more about the content work that you do, and I can get a chance to work with you and your team, how do I reach out to you? How do I find out more?
Yeah, easiest way is my website, www.mkquinn with two N's, media.com, or just email me, mdewolf@mkquinnmedia.com.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day and sharing with us. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Let's do it again soon.
All right, let's do it. All right,
Sweet.
everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join me. I hope you learned a lot there. If you ever have questions about podcasting, you can connect with Matt. He's also always on LinkedIn, just like myself, because we just love LinkedIn. LinkedIn's great. I think it's super fun. Anyway, speaking of super fun, the book. Yeah. Of course, I got to shock my stuff. Why not? Right? It's my book, my show. So I get to do what I want. That's why I have a show. So I can do what I want, which is tell you to go and get the book at Amazon. It's really getting good reviews. And I'm super high. I appreciate you guys' time, your week. We'll see you next time.